Hi everybody, it's Mr. Bob, and today we are starting a new book called Peak by Roland Smith. Now, unlike the other books that I've read, Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and The Hobbit, and even some of the picture books that I've done, I've never read this book. So it's going to be a discovery for me as well as you. And one of the things we'll do is we'll talk about a little bit before, but especially after the reading, we'll maybe ask a couple of questions that you can write in your writing journals in response, and maybe perhaps just talk a little bit about some of the particular writing devices or some of the things that is said in the book. Now, by devices, I mean ways in which the writer uses certain words or how he writes in order to write. So, anyway, this book is called Peak, and our first section is called The Assignment, in Moleskin number 1. My name is Peak. Yeah, I know, weird name. But you don't get to pick your name or your parents, or a lot of other things in life for that matter. It could have been worse. My parents could have named me Glacier, or Abyss, or Crampon. I'm not kidding. According to my mom, all those names were on the list. Vincent, my literary mentor at your school, this would be your English teacher, asked me to write this for my year-end assignment. No grades at our school. When Vincent reads the sentence you just read, he'll say, Peak, that is a run-on sentence and chaotically parenthetical. That's how he talks. Now, pay attention to the idea of parenthetical, because actually he uses parentheses a lot, and we'll talk what he means by parenthetical and how this might be a kind of writing device. And that's how he talks, and meaning it's a little confusing and choppy. And I'll tell him that my life is parenthetical, and the chaos is due to the fact that I'm starting this assignment in the back of a Toyota pickup in Tibet, aka China, aka is a substitute for also known as, with an automatic pencil that doesn't have an eraser, and it's not likely that I'm going to find an eraser around here. Vincent has also said that a good writer should draw the reader in by starting in the middle of the story with a hook, and then go back and fill in what happened before the hook. Once you have the reader hooked, you can write whatever you want as you slowly reel them in. Now, a hook in writing and a hook in speaking is a particular story or idea in the story that makes it particularly interesting, that makes you want to read the story. Oftentimes it's an episode of danger or adventure that says, oh, this could be interesting, I want to read it. And that's why he's saying that. I guess Vincent thinks readers are fish. If that's the case, most of Vincent's fish have gotten away. He's written something like 20 literary novels, all of which are out of print. If he knew what he was talking about, why do I have to start research or search dark, moldering aisles of used bookstores to find his books? Now I've done it. Remember this, Vincent. Writers should tell the brutal truth in their own voice and not let individuals, society, or consequences dictate their words. And you thought no one was listening to you in class. Ha! You also know that I really like your books, or I wouldn't waste my time trying to find them. Nor would I be trying to get the story down in the back of a truck in Tibet. Now, all of this is written in a parentheses, and this is what it means by parenthetical. The parentheses contain an idea or a segment in the story that's not really about the story, but it's really explaining something in the story. And so when it says parenthetical, that's partly what we'll mean, and we'll pay attention to this, and we'll talk about it more later. Speaking of which, this morning we slowed down to get around a boulder the size of a school bus that had fallen in the middle of the road. In the USA, we would use dynamite or heavy equipment to move it. In Tibet, they use picks, sledgehammers, and prisoners in tattered, quilted coats to chip the boulder down to nothing. The prisoners smiled at us as we tried not to run over their shackled feet on the narrow road. Their cheerful faces were covered in nicks and cuts from rock shrapnel. Those not chipping used crude wooden wheelbarrows to move the man-made gravel over to potholes, which where very old Tibetan prisoners used battered shovels and rakes to fill in the holes. Chinese soldiers in green uniforms and with rifles slung over the shoulders stood about 50-gallon burn barrel smoking cigarettes. The prisoners looked happier than the soldiers did. I wondered if the bulger would be gone by the time I came back through. I wondered if I'd ever come back through. The hook. I was only 2/3 of the wall up the wall when the sleet started to freeze onto the black terracotta. Terracotta is kind of it's kind of a clay kind of substance. It's very hard. It's often been cooked, almost like earthenware if you have some at home. My fingers were numb. My nose was running. I didn't have a free hand to wipe my nose, or enough rope to rappel about 500 feet to the ground. I had planned everything out so carefully except for the weather, and now it was uh-oh time. A gust of wind tried to peel me off the wall. I dug my fingers into the seam and hugged the terracotta until it passed. I should have waited until June to make the ascent, but no, moron has to go up in March. Why? Because everything was ready, and I have a problem with waiting. I had studied the wall, built all my custom protection, and picked the date. I was ready, and if the date passed, I might not try it at all. It doesn't take much to talk yourself out of a stunt like this. That's why there are 6 billion people sitting safely inside homes. And one, moron, I shouted. Option number 1, finish the climb. 264 feet up, or about 100 precarious finger holds, providing my fingers didn't break off like icicles. Option 2, climb down. A little over 500 feet, 250 finger holds. Now, I'm going to take a break here in the story. Mr. Bob has done rock climbing with ropes and chalks and all the things that happen, and you can't really go down. Once you've gone up, especially when you've gone up a vertical wall, really the only way is to go up. It's very, very difficult to go down. It's much easier in many ways to go up. So really his only option was to go up. And it's one of the things about rock climbing that makes it so dangerous. Is because once you start going up, it's very, very difficult to get down unless you reach the top. Or you can rappel down with the rope. So anyway, this is happening here. Option number 3, wait for rescue. Scratch that option. No one knew I was on the wall. By morning, providing someone actually looked up and saw me, I would be an icy gargoyle. And if I lived, my mom would drop me off the wall herself. Now, vocabulary, a gargoyle is like a stone, evil thing. Sometimes it's an animal. It often looks like a bat or some kind of a demon-looking creature. And it's often on buildings, especially older buildings, as a kind of a decoration. And if I lived, my mom would drop me off the wall herself. Up it is, then. I timed my moves between vicious blasts of wind, which were becoming more frequent the higher I climbed. The sleet turned to hail, pelting me like a swarm of frozen hornets. But the worst happened about 30 feet from the top. 15 measly finger holds left. I had stopped to give the lactic acid searing my shoulders and arms a chance to simmer down. I was mouth-breathing, partly from exertion, partly from terror, and I told myself that I would make the final push as soon as they caught my breath. While I waited, a thick mist drifted in around me. The top of the wall disappeared, which was just as well. When you're tired and scared, 30 feet looks about the length of 2 football fields, and that can be pretty demoralizing. Scaling a wall happens 1 foothold and 1 handhold at a time. Thinking beyond that can weaken your resolve, and it's your will that gets you to the top as much as your muscles and climbing skills. Finally, I started breathing through my runny nose again. Kind of snorting, really, but I was able to close my mouth every other breath. This is it, I told myself. 15 more handholds, and I've topped it. I reached up for the next seam and counted a little snag. Well, a big snag, really. My right ear and cheek were frozen to the wall. To reach the top, you must have resolve, muscles, skill, and a face. Mine was anchored to the wall like a bolt, and a portion of it stayed there when I gathered enough resolve to tear it loose. Now I was mad, which was exactly what I needed to do to finish the climb. Cursing with every vertical lunge, I stopped about 4 feet below the edge, tempted to tag this monster with the blood running down my cheek. But instead, I took the mountain stencil out of my pack. Cheating, I know, but you have to have two free hands to do it freehand. Slapped it on the wall, and filled it with blue spray paint. This is when the helicopter came up behind me and nearly blew me off the wall. "You are under arrest," an amplified voice shouted above the deafening rotors. I looked down. Most of the mist had been swirled away by the chopper rotors, and for the first time in an hour I could see the busy street 800 feet below the skyscraper. A black rope dropped next to me, and two alarmed and angry voices leaned over the edge of the roof. "Take the rope!" I wasn't about to take the rope 4 feet from my goal. I started up. "Take the rope!" When my head reached the top of the railing, they hauled me up and cuffed my wrists behind my back. They were wearing SWAT gear and new NYPD baseball caps, and there were a lot of them. One of the cops leaned close to my bloody ear. "What were you thinking?" he said, then jerked me to my feet and handed me off to our regular street cop. "Get this moron to emergency." And we'll stop there as we pull the next part called "A Couple of Stitches in the Slammer." But I wanted to talk about the idea of a parenthetical statement, or parentheses, and how parentheses works in writing. Oftentimes, parentheses in math means that you do an operation in that math within the parentheses before you do other things in order to complete that thing. A parentheses in writing is basically when you have an idea that's either explaining something that you've written already or to get another idea that you want to add in there but doesn't really advance the story itself. Parenthetical means that it's something within the parentheses. It's something when you're writing, it's the ideas that are you would put in the parentheses. And oftentimes when it's chaotic parenthetically, in other words, as the person who was critiquing his writing said, it means that the stuff that he is putting in doesn't really have much to do with it, and it's kind of taking you away from the story. But sometimes chaotic parenthetical writing can actually have its own method and its own purpose. Anyway, that's the idea about parenthetical writing. It's when you take an idea that you want to explain more, but it kind of detracts from the story that you're reading or you're writing. Anyway, we'll read more next time. This is Mr. Bob hoping that you have a good weekend and enjoy your time.